he sounds like a brutal capitalist, Surely, if you say, Babam, the owners of property are the ones who are supposed to, you'll correct me, are the ones who are supposed to lead. And now we're facing the expropriation. It's an act. It's no longer a bill, it's an act. How do you balance that? Because those who are in power are those who don't own the property. But those who own the property currently are fearing the issue of this act, its implications. And you talk about investment. That will mean those who own the property under the threat of this bill, they will rather not invest in this country. And those who have property, they will rather sell before the doomsday arrives. That's what you are saying?
Yeah. I think I'm still on. What is happening to South Africa? Because of the threat that is sitting over the owners of property, the threat of expropriation, of exploitative tax system, and then having to finance half of the population that's not working. What is happening is that they're keeping their money in the bank, the balance of the money that they have. Because if you invest it, it can be expropriated. So you invest as little as possible. So it was revealed a few weeks ago that South African private sector is sitting in its current accounts on R1 trillion, which is just sitting in the bank, not being invested. But how are you going to invest it if the Minister of Mines is saying, if you invest it, I take half of it and pocket it for my BE friends? So that is why they won't invest. But as I pointed out, that's a recipe for disaster for all of us in South Africa, because we face with this hugely unstable society because of the massive unemployment and the massive poverty that we're sitting with. Now, you're asking, what is the compromise? Well, there is no compromise. You either develop your economy or you don't develop your economy. We have to bring down the standard of living of the public sector employees. And we have to dilute the power of the property-less political elite. That has to be diluted with the power of the workers, the power of the poor, and the power of the capitalists. They have to dilute the power of the middle class that is now dominant in our political system. I don't know if I've answered your question.
Look, taking the cue from what has been happening in other African countries, as well as in the South American countries, we know that South Africa also is on the edge of copying the similar strategy, that when the liberation movement vacates power, they will rather pull everyone down. They are like acting like Samson, to say, I am the one who's holding this pillar. And if you remove me from this pillar, and then everything is going to go down. As I've said even the last time, the last kick of a dying animal is always vicious, An animal do not want to go alone. And so how can we prevent that deadly situation that we are currently facing?
Well, the property owners, let me say, have to intervene in the political system and become political participants. This is one of the problems we have in South Africa, is that the owners of capital only act when we're on the edge of the precipice. If you look at our history, there has really only been two occasions when business has intervened politically in this country. One was in 1896 with the Jameson raid, because the Kruger government in the Transvaal was on the verge of destroying the gold mining industry. So the mining companies mobilized an insurrection against the Kruger regime. And that ultimately culminated in the Anglo-Boer War, where the British government came to the side of the mining companies and removed the Kruger regime themselves. That was one time. The other time was in 1985, after the creation of COSATU, the creation of UDF, the uprising in the 80s against the tricameral parliament. Then the country was on the verge of explosion. Then the chairman of Anglo-American Corporation, a man called Gavin Rayleigh, organized a delegation of other CEOs and flew to Zambia to go and negotiate with the ANC what the future economy of South Africa should look like. And that became a template of the negotiations which ultimately led to our new constitution. But the private sector acts when we are absolutely on the verge of collapse, when the society is on the verge of collapse. Now, that is a very risky way of operating, because you could just miss it by a day and the collapse happens. So we need more active political activity from the owners of capital in South Africa. Because without their participation, as I showed, they control most of the skilled labor force in this country. Without their labor force, without their management skills, we can't have golf courses like this one. If you give it to the state, we all know what happens. So that's why they have to be involved in politics.
Sure.